Hey y'all, in this video we're going to go over the amphibian notes. So the word amphibian means double life because amphibians are generally going to spend part of their life in the water and part of their life on land. Some organisms that are considered amphibians would be frogs, toads, newts, and salamanders. So for classifying amphibians, they're going to fall in the kingdom Animalia just like everything else that we've been studying in zoology. We are still in the phylum Chordata, as we will be the rest of the year. And now we are in the class of Amphibia. And then the three main orders we're going to focus on is Anura, which is frogs and toads, Caudata, which is salamanders, newts, and water dogs, and Gymnophiona, which is caecilians. So some just general characteristics of amphibians is first that they are ectothermic, which means that they cannot regulate their body temperature on their own. It's regulated by the environment, or a simple way to put it is they're cold-blooded animals versus like humans are warm-blooded, and we are able to regulate our body temperature. Amphibians are going to live in water in their larval stage and then land as an adult stage. So in their larval stage, they're going to breathe through gills versus as an adult, they're going to breathe through lungs. Their skin is going to be very moist and they're going to have a lot of mucus glands to keep it that way. And they do not have scales or true claws. Some of them might have some sharp claw-like things, but they're not considered like truly to be a claw. Right? They do not have adaptations for a complete terrestrial or land life, so they haven't evolved all the way to be just on land. They are considered tetrapods, the prefix tetra meaning four, and the main part there of pod meaning foot. So they have 4 feet or 4 legs, which you're probably aware of based on what I read off. Now, some of them aren't going to have that many, but most will. They're going to be freshwater dependent. They're not going to live in saltwater or marine environments. And they are going to actually have the ability to breathe through their skin, which, is something unique about them. And a lot of them are also going to contain poisons in their skin. Right? For breathing, in a larval stage, they're going to exchange gases through both their skin and their gills. And then the adult stage, they're going to exchange gases through both their skin and their lungs. So in both stages of their life, they're able to breathe through their skin. And then depending on the other stages, either gills or lungs. The ability to breathe through skin is called a cutaneous breather, is the term for that. Right. For their circulatory system, they have a 3-chambered heart. So we went from a fish having a 2-chamber to amphibians have a 3-chamber, and eventually we'll get to humans who have a 4-chamber. They do have what's called a double loop circulatory system, and the first loop is will carry oxygen poor blood from the heart to the lungs and the skin, and it'll pick up oxygen rich blood from the lungs slash skin and then go back to the heart. So the first loop is focused on taking oxygen poor blood and getting oxygen rich blood. The second loop then is going to take that oxygen rich blood from the heart and then take it to the rest of the body and then bring back that oxygen poor blood from the body back to the heart. So it's kind of similar in a way to our circulatory system, but it's not going to do it with a 4-chambered heart. It's going to do it with a 3-chambered heart. And that third chamber is kind of a mix of like oxygen rich and poor blood, but you don't have to know that for the test. All right, for reproduction, a lot of frogs are going to show sexual dimorphism when you're going to easily be able to see the difference between the males and the females. Normally, it's going to be in body size or the color of the species. Then again, in a lot of species, it's going to be very hard to tell the difference between males and females because they're going to look very similar. In these species, the male frogs are also often going to produce a release call when classed by another male saying like, hey, but I'm a male, like, get off me. During mating season, researchers can use release calls to tell which frogs are male and which are female. So since they can't visually tell the difference between them just by looking at them, they're going to have to recognize the sounds the frogs make, whether they're male or female. Right? Continuing with reproduction, amphibian eggs do not have shells, which you're probably aware of, and they will dry out if they're not kept moist. So if you see some frog eggs in a pond and you remove them, you're just gonna kill off all those eggs. So most eggs are laid in water because that's an easy way, obviously, to keep them wet. Most parents, or amphibian parents rather, will abandon their eggs shortly after they lay them. So they'll go find somewhere to lay them and just abandon them. They don't ever then take care of their kids when they're born. All right. Eggs are fertilized externally outside the body. The female will discharge the eggs, usually again in the water, and then the male will shed sperm over top the eggs. The large masses of eggs are technically called frog spawn. Right? So when there is no parental care, like I said earlier, that a lot of these amphibian parents will just lay their eggs and then bounce. There's those will typically lay around 200 eggs at a time. The more those amphibians use more energy spent making the large amounts of eggs, and then they don't spend any time caring for the young. If the animal does give parental care, raising the young, then they're spending energy on that care, and so the female tends to produce fewer eggs. So there's less energy spent making the eggs and more energy spent caring for the young. And this will come up again in some later sections with the rest of the groups of animals we have to learn about too. Right. So the eggs that amphibians lay are generally going to be encased in a sticky, transparent jelly that attaches the egg mass to underwater plants. The jelly also provides nourishment to the developing embryos until they hatch into larvae, which we typically call them tadpoles. Other places in the world call them polywogs. Personally, I just stick to tadpoles. The embryo stage is an early developmental stage after fertilization. Is when that one occurs. Right? After the babies hatch, they'll undergo metamorphosis, which we talked about with insects, is a profound change in form from one stage to the next in the life history of the organism. So they're going to go from eggs to tadpoles to frogs, and you can kind of, this picture is kind of small, but you can kind of see that here. And you guys have probably learned about that growing up in like your even elementary level science classes. Right? So to talk about some unusual breeders, just because, animals are weird. The first one is Darwin's frog. It's the female will lay the eggs in moist soil. When there's the eggs hatch, the male will essentially swallow the tadpoles and store them in his vocal sacs, which is that throat pouch. And the tadpoles will stay there through metamorphosis, which is roughly about 6 weeks for the species. And then the mature froglets are released. So this guy, he just carries them around in his mouth or his throat sac, and then once they're, older, the 6 weeks old, he releases them. The next one is the midwife toad. After fertilization, the male will wrap the eggs around his legs to protect them from predators. And so when they're ready to hatch, the male will wade into the water to release the tadpoles. So you can see a picture of him. He'll just carry him around like a weird backpack. Right. Then there's a Suriname toad, which the female will release about 60 to 100 eggs. And then after fertilization, the male pats the eggs down onto the female's back, which essentially he's packing them down so hard it embeds them into her skin. And essentially pockets will form around each egg. And then the larva will develop through the tadpole stage into the froglets, like little baby frogs. And they'll eventually push themselves out of their little pocket in her skin. And you can see in this picture here is those eggs on her skin. And then the next one is the coast foam nest tree frog, which is when summer rainfall starts, males call from branches that overhang the water. The female will turn her secretions into a large white foam nest, which she'll then deposit her eggs in. And you can see that in these pictures here. Then they're fertilized by the males, and the eggs will develop into tadpoles inside this nest that'll get hard. And then after about 5 days of being there, the tadpoles become active and they'll fall into the water below, living there until the metamorphosis is complete. So they're essentially like the eggs are laid in a tree and then fall into the water below. These frogs are not native to Georgia, so don't worry about like being around a body of water in Georgia and thinking these are going to fall on top of you. All right, and that is it for this video. I'll finish up in a second video.